Okay. Good morning. Okay, so rather right before I was about to start, someone came over to me and said, probably you were from the people who were afraid to go to Rav Chaim because you're afraid he's going to make you put in a beard. I'm afraid to stay for the shir. So I don't plan on ruining anything or fixing anything. I'm going to talk a little bit klaliistic about beards and shaving. And I want to start like this. The Reb Meir Primishlaner had a menorah, and on the menorah there was all sorts of like engraved etchings, like in the silver. And in the etchings of the silver, there were etchings of the Avis. And Avram Avinu wore a shtreimel with strakis and a beautiful bekisha, and all the Avis were dressed in full Chassidish garb. And by the Misnagdim, they would make fun of the pictures, the depiction that Reb Meir Primishlaner had in his menorah, like assuming that everybody was Chassidish. Now, I don't know if Avram Avinu wore strakis and a shtreimel or not, but I'm pretty sure he had a beard. I'm pretty sure any depiction that you can make of the Avis or of people from a long time ago had beards. So there is a certain gefiel, a certain gisha, that beards is just the Jewish look. It's like just the Yiddish look. and some poskim, some of the Gedolei poskim even said that outright, some didn't. And we'll discuss that. So now where did this kilush change start? Where beards maybe stop being stop being so exclusively the Jewish look. So the first that I could tell, and I might be getting this a drop wrong, but the first that I could tell who ditched the beard were Italian Jews. After the Renaissance, when Italians were becoming much more chachmadik and artsy and successful, so Italian Jews who were part of the day, they lived with their Goyish neighbors, began to ditch the beards. This is probably like in the late 1500s, early 1600s, they start ditching the beards. And I'm going to chart this just through the Chuvas and the Svarim that talk about it. You'll see many poskim and like Svarim that have an eye for giving musar to the tzibur will start noting, like in the Olam who shaves and the Olam who uses a razor to cut their beards, you start seeing people giving musar to Stam the Hamaynam about it in Italy in that kufa. For example, there was a sefer that came out, no name on it. It was called Sefer HaZachronis, which usually sounds like it's going to be a history book, but it was anything but. The Sefer HaZachronis was 15 Zachronis, and it was basically a sefer that came out writing about all things that the Olam was doing wrong. It's a sefer that was published in northern Italy, and it came out, chastising everybody, the whole tzibur, for everything they're doing wrong, everything they're not doing right. And there was things about kashrus, there was things about yayin nesach, there was things about Shabbos, and right in the middle over there is one about shaving. Now, the shaving that it's discussing in the Sefer HaZachronis is shaving with a razor, and it's a few pages of telling the Olam how shlach it is to shave with a razor and how bad it is for them and etc. Now, the Sefer HaZachronis is a halacha sefer. It's something that's quoted extensively by many, many different poskim, but it was published without a name. Now, how do we know what it is and what to do with it? Is because there were several people who were close enough to the mechaber who eventually let the cat out of the bag and let it slip who wrote it. So today we know that the mechaber of the Sefer HaZachronis was Reb Shmuel Abuav, the Shut Dvar Shmuel, which was one of the Gedolei poskim in his day. The way we know is because the Chida, who was a big traveler, who never met Reb Shmuel Abuav as far as I know, but he knew people who knew. The Yavitz writes that his father, the Chacham Tzvi, stayed in Reb Shmuel Abuav's house, and he told him, meaning, so we know from different people that this was Reb Shmuel Abuav's work that he's writing. But again, this shows us just the date and the time when this became like a relevant concern. No, different one. No, not even related. The Maram Chagiz, for example, or Moshe Chagiz, who's in the same time as the Chacham Tzvi, he also starts writing about shaving with a razor, without a razor. So you see the different poskim that are discussing it in their time. L'mashal, where did it come to eventually shaving, or the proper way, becomes synonymous with the Litvish Olam? Right? Eventually it becomes the Olam Yeshivas that shaves and the Litvish Olam that shaves. So when did it migrate to the Litvaks, meaning to leave Italy and wherever? So the Chassam Sofer in a tshuva in Orach Chaim in Kufnan Tes, which is a famous tshuva about shaving, that we'll pick it apart in more detail. Just in regards to this historical detail, the Chassam Sofer says that after Tach V'Tat, when Jews had to run away and had to hide and disguise themselves, so people started shaving. People started getting rid of their beards, getting rid of their Jewish clothing. And once that thing caught on, so the minig, kind of stuck around and it started working its way into the regular tzibur. For example, in Russia, there was a czar, whose name was Peter the Great. He made a rule, an edict, that all Russian men have to shave. Now, the point of this was probably because the noblemen who were his biggest, issue in ruling the country, one of their main prides was that they had these big lange bards. So in order to shame them and humble them, he forced them to shave. Some of them were very against it. And eventually that also trickles down into the Jewish world. In Poland, for example, in Congress Poland, the Chassam Sofer brings down, I believe the Chassam Sofer brings this down, there was a king, we don't know his name, who couldn't grow a beard. And because he couldn't grow a beard, he made a rule that no one around him was allowed to have a beard. So his nobles started shaving, and their family started shaving, and then eventually caught on in Poland. Meaning, so this just like made its way throughout the entire population, wherever Jews lived, over a few hundred years, between, call it, 1550 and 1750. It spreads. Eventually, you'll see chuvas in the Nid Behuda, many chuvas about it when it gets to his part of the world. Meaning, it just keeps spreading from part of the world to part of the world, and it always rises. Shilas always arise in its wake. So that's how it spreads around. Now, one of the most interesting stories that I came across that's negeya to this thing is what do you do when two communities that have very different minhagim about shaving come into conflict with each other? Meaning this again happened l'chayra after World War II when communities again met in Eretz Yisrael in America. They became rules. Some shul would say you can only daven for Lamed if you have a beard. It still exists, certain rules like this. Meaning how do two communities that have very different gishas towards shaving, towards having beards, what happens when they come in contact with each other? Now there's a slightly funny story that I came across. Now I don't know, some say it's probably a fairy tale, but there's a slightly funny story. There's a sefer called Sefer HaMasayis, the travelogue of Rav Sasson Chai Lebeis Castile. That's his name. His name was Sasson Chai Lebeis Castile. He's probably a Spanish Jew. The book ends off that he retires ultimately alone and poor to Afghanistan, and he dies in Afghanistan. Now, Teich HaDvarim, he writes of all his travels through Europe, and there's not much new information there that we don't know without him, meaning about how different Frum Kehillas looked during those days. But he writes that he came from Italy, I think, where everyone in his tzibur would shave their beards, not with a razor, but they would shave their beards in a proper way. And he didn't have a beard. Eventually he started going for business to Tunisia, to Tunis. And over there, the Ilm grew beards. So what he would do is when he would get to Tunis, he would put on a beard, like a Rav Chaim beard. He would grow just a little bit so no one would bother him. And he'd come home, he'd shave, and again, like this again. But eventually he says he went on a longer business trip, like a 2-year business trip to Tunis. And while he was there, he was privileged to sit by a drasha from somebody, doesn't say who gave a drasha, bemoaning the terrible state of people who shave their beards. Al-Pi Kabbalah, it's such a terrible thing to do, and how heilig it is, and how you can't touch them, and you have to leave them. And he decided to grow a beard. And he didn't grow a beard stam, like a trimmed beard. He took on the Kabbalistic premise that even touching the beard with the scissors is the worst thing in the world. And he grew a beard, as a Langabard. He says he came home to his family in Spain or Italy, wherever they were, and his wife didn't recognize him. He knocks on the door, and she lets out a shriek, and she says, I'm quoting his words, he says, "Who's this goat? The long beard who's at my door? I don't know what this guy wants from me." He says, No, he pulls the beard back, "It's me, it's Sasson. You know me." "No, I don't know you. Sasson with a beard, I don't know, you're not welcome back here." And he writes that they went in front of the Bezdin for a get, and the Bezdin tried to explain to her that a beard's not so terrible, and he's doing it for ruchnistic reasons. And she says, "No, a beard is a deal breaker for me. I'm not having a guy with a beard like this." And he says ultimately they get divorced, I believe. And he moves, he travels, Now the problem is that I think modern day Chachamim believe that this is a fairy tale. It was made up. There was never a person, Sasson Chai from Castile. This is a lie. Somebody just wrote like a historically accurate book about a fictional character to make it interesting. So l'chayra, this story of the divorce that arose because of someone trapped between two different styles of beard having is not a true story. But Lamaisa, this story plays itself out in a different way in a Greisa Machlekes HaPoskim. And that's as follows. Now, I don't know exactly where these merchants came from. It seems like they were merchants who came from Italy and went to Greece. Now, what they would do is the Italians had certain products that they made very well, that they wanted to sell over the world. So what they would do is they would send like a young man, a young guy who doesn't have a family, to different outposts. They would send them, let's say, to Saloniki, that's where the story took place, and he would open up shop over there, and they would fill him up with the products that they made back at home. And when he would run out, he'd come back home to Italy, he'd see his family for a few months, he'd fill up again, another wagon full, and he'd go back to Saloniki and he'd man the outpost. It was like an outpost of products. Now the thing is that the Jews in Saloniki, who were Turkish Jews, they didn't shave. They had long chashav beards. Now the Italian Jew, the boy who's coming, or the young man who's coming to open the outpost over there, he would come agashayin and gansen, with clean shaven. So it became like a fight. So there's different poskim that discuss this, and this is interesting tshuva. The Divrei Yosef, or Yosef Irgas, who's an Italian posik, he writes as follows. He writes, he received a letter from Saloniki, which is in Greece, where there were, he says, there were people who went to open up shops over there. And they would come, geshaven, no problem. He says the Bezdin who was there would instruct them that they have every right to follow whatever minhagim they have from home. In all regards, follow your minhagim that you have from home, You don't have to bend your minhagim to be like the minhagim of Saloniki where you're coming to. He says, "Vayihi hayom," the dayanim who allowed this died. He says, "Acha niftaru chacham manal, hekimu lehem akal chacham macherim." Some more stringent chachamim took over the bezdin. He says, "V'roitzim chacham meilu lasas haskama b'cherim neged ha'franko shelo yigal chuskanim." They want to put these merchants, these visiting merchants, into chayrim and say you cannot shave your beard anymore. They can't shave their beards anymore the way they were doing until now. They should grow their beards long like the minig of the city is, like the minig of Saloniki is. But the Franco, she says, they don't want to shtaltzu lahaskim b'davar zeh. We're not from here. Why are you forcing us to have your minhagim? We're eventually going to go back to our cities and we're going to shave off our beards. We're not going to be here long term. Why are you forcing us to shtaltzu to your rules? He says they fought back and forth until finally the members of the Saloniki trade union or workers guild said that if you don't grow a beard, you can't have a shop in Saloniki. That was they wielded the power of the purse. They said we're going to force you to shave, but to not shave, by telling you that if you don't grow a beard, you can't have a shop over here. And the aggrieved parties wrote to the Divrei Yosef, the Yosef Irgas, a great Italian Rav in the early 1700s, to ask him, what are we supposed to do about this? Are they right? Are they wrong? How are we supposed to like this? Now, but let me just furnish a drop of the backstory, the halachic information that's going to go into the shaila here that Yosef Irgas is going to use, and that the Poskim Mochelik and him are going to bring as well. So everybody knows the Mishnah in Makis on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph says that if someone shaves his beard, he's able to b'chamish alavim because there are 5 places that you're not allowed to shave. Now, the Mishnah is talking about a tar, one who shaves it with a razor. The Mishnah says someone who shaves with a razor is over 5 lavim. Now, there's a grace of machlekes rishonim where those 5 locations are. Is it 1, 2, 3, 5? Like 1, 2, 4, like that, or is it? I think the way some places hold is 2, 4, 5. There's many different shittas, and Ad Kedei Kach that the Rush brings down. There used to be a minig to leave just a pencil beard. Meaning you'd leave one little, a centimeter thick, running across the face, just straight down from the face down there, and like that you've accommodated all the shittas. Because all the shittas are within this 1 centimeter, line running down. The Rosh says, Lamaisa, this is a shvacha minig, because there's many, many different shittas. Rabu, he says, Rabu kama Rabu hapoiskim, hadeis, where exactly the 5 spots are, and you have no idea if you're actually covering the 5, you're not covering the 5, so it's a shvacha minig, he says. Now, Lamaisa, we don't really know, and the Torah brings, I think, 5 different deis as to where the 5 places are. So it's very hard to know exactly where the places are. So let's just assume, from your cheekbone all the way down, possibly including your neck, and the neck is itself a separate machlekes, all the way down to here, could be part of the areas that are included in the Yisur of shaving. Now, the Gemara on Sanhedrin, the Chaf Aleph and Aleph, following up on the Mishnah, the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, "Ve'enei chayiv ad sheyitlin b'tar." The Mishnah said you only chayiv until you shave it with a razor. Tanar Rabbanan, the Gemara darshans, who passes zikanim lo yigalechu, yachal afilu gilchu b'misparayim. Maybe even if you shaved it with a scissors, you trimmed it yechayiv. Tamalim lo sashchas. You shouldn't destroy. And a scissors is not destruction. A scissors is trimming. Maybe if you pull it out with a tweezer, one at a time, you just grab it and pull it out, you should be chayiv also. The Gemara says, because of these 2 dueling drushes, it has to be that the only type of shaving that's usher is shaving with a tar, using a razor. To which the Rivan and the Rashi and Nazir and Taisvis and the Rosh and many others, Rova the Rishonim Paskin, like this Gemara straight up, with no caveats, that shaving with a razor is asami deraisa, but anything that's not a razor, anything that's a scissor, even if it comes really close to the skin, i.e. misparayim ke'ein tar, a scissors that accomplishes what a tar accomplishes, what we would call a manor day trimmer or a shaver, depending on the model, would be mutter. That seems to be the stamiyus of the din of the Gemara, and that's what most Rishonim who learn this Gemara agree with this stamiyus of the Gemara. Now, there is a point of contention. The Rambam chooses very interesting words when he says this Gemara. The Rambam says as follows. The Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, which is itself an interesting thing, that the Rambam puts shaving in Hilchos Avodah Zarah. The Rambam holds, I'll read you, the Rambam in Perek Yud Beis of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Allah Chazayin, the Rambam says like this. He says, Derech Kehane Avdei Kechavim. It was the way of the priests of the Avdei Kechavim, Hayel Lahashchas Zekanam, was to destroy their beards. Lefichach, Asra Torah Lahashchas Hazakim. Because of that, the Torah asks you to shave your beard. Now this is one of these very controversial Rambams, where the Rambam is saying the reason for the Torah's Isser is only because of the Avodah Zarah, and L'chaira, that almost implies that if that goes away, then the reason's gone. To which the Torah brings this down, and Torah says the reason is because the Torah told us, and Ein Lanu Esik in Time Mitzvahs. And this is a famous, there's many Rambams like this, and it's a famous shmuz. It's not for now. But the Rambam puts it in Nochas Avodah Zarah because he holds it has to do with Avodah Zarah. Then the Rambam says as follows: Ve'enei chayev, you're only chayev, you're not chayev ad sheyigalchenu b'tar, until you shave it with a razor. Shenemar v'leisashchis as pas sikonecha, giluach sheyesh b'ashchas. It has to be a giluach that has destruction. Now if you look at the words of the Rambam has a very, very interesting word choice. The Rambam says ve'enei chayev. You're not chayev, meaning you don't get the einshim or the lav until you migalech with the tar, until you do it with a razor. Now, if I wanted to say that it's only aser with a razor, I would say ve'enei aser ela b'tar. It's mutter with everything else. The Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam says ve'enei chayev. It sounds like maybe there's like two steps. Maybe you could be over the lav and you're just not chayev the malchus or the different einshim until it's b'tar. But it could be like patar v'laser, like by Shabbos. You have a lot of things that are patar v'laser. So this is the Rambam's words. Now this raises a big machlokes into what exactly the Rambam sheet is. The chinuch in I believe mitzvah Reish Nun, and other achronim like the Meiser Rekeach and I forgot the Knesset, maybe the Knesset Agdela, all say. I think Knesset is on the other side actually. There's three achronim who say it, but the Sefer HaChinuch is not an achron, he's the Ra'ah, and the Knesset, the Meiser Rekeach, and others say there's a dik, and the Rambam holds, and the Ikar then it's aser even misparayim kein tar, even if you're using a scissors that's getting very close, that's aser too. And this that he says ve'enei chayev until you use the tar, you're not chayev the einshim until you use the tar. But the Rambam doesn't hold that it's mutter and ganzen. Now, once you put this onto the table, so then it becomes there's a lot more reason to be machmer, so to speak. Meaning there's a lot more reason to be machmer. Now that's point number one, and we'll get to who's matcha that. Point number two is there's a Trumas Hadeshen. The Trumas Hadeshen in Siman Reish Tzadikei Chelik Aleph Siman Reish Tzadikei, the Trumas Hadeshen has a shayla as follows. He wants to know yesh nidnud iser legaleach pas hazakim misparayim eloi. He's asking it the right way. Is there a nidnud iser? Not, and that's an important word. The Trumas Hadeshen also knew how to write if something's aser or mutter. Trumas Hadeshen asks it, is there a smakim? Is there something that could go wrong? Yesh nidnud iser. Is there like something that could go wrong when you shave it as Misparayim kein tar? Says the Trumas Hadeshen, Yirid the yesh makom lahachmer. There is makom lahachmer. El she'ena ilm nizharim b'davar. People are not nizar b'davar. And he writes, he goes on, he says that because, and this is something that becomes negay in modern day poskim, he says sometimes with the scissors, the blades could be so sharp that the bottom blade is really just running against the skin, it's cutting on its own, and that could serve as a tar. So he writes that in certain areas a person should be machmer not to use it because it could cause problems. So now you have two of the Gedolei Rishonim that already opened up that there's makom to be machmer, that even when it's misparayim kein tar, even when it's not really a shaver, still there's makom to be machmer, there's makom to be saying that you're not allowed to do that. Now, how does that come down to us, the regular way things come down? So if you look in the Torah brings down that misparayim kein tar is mutter, only tar is aser, because that's how the Rosh holds, that's how his father the Rosh held. The Torah learns the Rambam like that. The Torah holds that the Rambam disregards the Diak, says the Rambam holds like that also. Additionally, the Bedek Habayis, which is the Beis Yosef, brings down the Trumas Hadeshen, who has a Psatzad Lahachmer, and he ends off and he says, the Kasav Sham, the Aser Hein Legaleach Pasakanim Misparayim El Sha'olim Ein Izharim B'davar. He takes the Nekayt Lishna Kama, he takes the Trumas Hadeshen's first words out the gate, that the Velt is not noyig to be nizar, and he says the Velt's not noyig to be nizar. The Trumas Hadeshen is Psachshash, the Velt's not noyig to be nizar. Additionally, the Darkei Moshe brings down the Trumas Hadeshen on the Torah. Darkei Moshe also says you don't have to be machmal like Trumas Hadeshen. Now, when it comes to Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei and Kuf Pei Aleph and Sif Yod, Shulchan Aruch says as follows: Einei chayev al hashchasas pas hazakin. You're not chayev for shaving the beard, ela b'tar, only with a razor. Al misparayim, if you use the scissors, mutter afilu ke'en tar. Even if it accomplishes a very close cut, similar to a tar, still it's mutter. He says, Michal Makayim, this is the Ramah, Hagal, Michal Makayim. Nizharim, we're careful, Kishmistaprim, Misparayim, when you use it, that you should use it in a scissors motion, and not just run it against your skin, very sharp with the bottom one, because then it could be like the Trumas Hadeshen. So the Ramah accommodates the Trumas Hadeshen's chash, but very specifically to how the Trumas Hadeshen was worried about it. Not to say that person can't use the scissors. He doesn't say, Memela don't shave, Memela don't come too close, Memela don't use the scissors. He just says, be careful not to use the scissors in the way the Trumas Hadeshen says the scissors could be a problem. So he interprets it very, very narrowly, very, very face value, no reason for no expanding of the Chumrah. And on him even the Shach writes that the Trumas Hadeshen himself is a Chumrah, Havalon the Leinoisif. Let's not be Moisef any Chumras, it's Mutter and Gansen. So the Gedolei HaPoskim, the Torah, the Rosh, the Rambam, the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, the Shach, the Marshal, the Bach even, whose writes to be machmer but doesn't say it lemaisa, all seem to hold that shaving one's beard, as long as it's done without a razor, as long as it's done with misparayim kein tar, is not a problem. So call it like this. Let's say like this, and this is a statement that you could probably take to the bank. Meaning, there's going to be chalkim in this, of course, but this is a statement you can take to the bank that the halacha is straightforward halacha. before we start mixing in other rationales, straightforward halacha, the halacha is that one is allowed to shave his beard with a Misbrayim Kein Tar. The halacha is you could use a scissors or a trimmer or whatever would fit into the category of Misbrayim Kein Tar to shave your beard. The halacha kipshuta straight up is that it's mutter. And as always gepaskin in Rov Rishonim, based on Medina the Gemara, kipshuta of the Gemara, and that's how the Mechaber learns, and that's how the Ramah agrees, and the Shach, and etc., and the Chasam Sefer, and Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz has a tshuva about it, and many of the Gedolei HaPoskim name the son as a pashtus that one is allowed to do this. Now, of course, there are chalkim, but I just want to mark that down, that the halacha kipshuta, the straightforward halacha is that it's mutter to do it. Now, so aside from the poskim that were very machmer because of the Rambam, and there are those like the Meiser Ekech and others, the Reb David Pardo, that's the one I was missing, the Merkavas HaMishnah, Reb David Pardo, there was others who were machmer on it, but there are many poskim who clearly, strongly, heavy-handedly almost came out and said that the pashtus is the pashtus, and you don't have reason to be machmer. For example, the Chida in Shot Chaim Shal in his Chuvas, the Chida writes, he's writing about Reb David Pardo, who incidentally was his mechutin, so this was like a family fight. He writes, he says, "V'nivhalti mirois shekaisav al zed the ein lasses there plaster lichvas alamas psachta." He says, I was shocked to hear that he could write that this is that shaving is usher and it's a terrible thing to do. He says, "V'tamani eich kasav loishen zel psak maran hakadosh b'shegam hashevach hashbiach l'maran zal." He says the mechaber paskins that it's mutter. How is he writing that it's an aberration, it's an unacceptable? The mechaber writes it's mutter. He says. And he continues, he says, it would have been better, he says, if he would have taken the time to defend the minig. He says, Yisaid l'minig Yisrael. It would have been better off if he would have dedicated his time to find the Yisaid, to justify the minig of Yisrael, Shu'al Pi Adin, and he would have been, taking the time to be matzdik, what people do, what they shave, what they trim, instead of, saying that the Beis Yosef is wrong and this is the halacha. So this is the basic halachic premise. Now let's go back to the Shaila of the Divrei Yosef. So when the Shaila came to the Divrei Yosef about these merchants who got into a scuffle about if they're allowed to shave and not shave, the Divrei Yosef strangely goes the other way. The Divrei Yosef brings the Rambam, the Rambam that says ve'enim motav ve'enim chayev, which sounds like it's still aser, and he says Mistam the Rambam holds it's aser, and even though the Mechaber says it's mutter, but L'maisa the Rambam holds it's aser. So there's makom to be machmer. He's not saying it's aser, saying there's makom to be machmer. Aibazah, he says as follows, and that's why it's important for him to say. Aibazah says as follows: when you come to a kehila and they have a minig because of a halacha, because of a chumrah that they have, then it's not so simple not to shtal tzu to the new kehila's minhagim. And if the new kehila has a minig stam for no reason, it's just cultural. It's just this is how they like to do things, but it has no halachic basis. So then disregard it. You do what you do. Wear the clothing you wear. Don't be garish what the community is doing. But if the community has a minig that's based upon some sort of halachic basis, where there's a reason to be machmer, then you don't have the ability to just come and disregard their minig. So says the Divrei Yosef, since the kehila in Saloniki, their minig is based on the Rambam, is based on the poskim that hold that it's asur to shave, even with the scissors, it's asur to trim even with the scissors, it's a legitimate minig. If it's a legitimate minig, then these merchants who are coming from wherever they're coming from, they don't have the right to ignore this minig. And therefore he says that the merchants who are boxing out their competitors by saying that if you don't agree to grow a beard, you can't participate in the marketplace here, they're correct, they have the right to do that. That's what the Divrei Yosef says. Comes along the Shemesh Staka, which is the Shemesh Staka is Reb Shimshon Morporgo, who is a contemporary of the Divrei Yosef, another Italian posek, and he writes very strongly to be chaylik on the Divrei Yosef, and he writes as follows. I'm going to read you some of it because it's a strong defense. Aside from the actual halachic nitty-gritty of defending, when a minig is kayim, when the place is going to do, which he goes into each of these pages, each of these chuvas are like 10 pages long, describing the exact, back and forth of place is going to do and when a minig has teeth or not. But he says as follows. He says like this: "V'afki eini roi v'hagin limud tzchos al dayane goyla am chachme v'goyne b'dinas Italia." Says the Shemesh Staka, even though I'm not worthy of being the one who should be melamed tzchos on the Gedolei HaPoskim of Italy, Kedoshim asher ba'aretz hema shleimim v'chein rabim dar v'chacham of dar v'sheiftav asher artei rasam zayreach mimizrach shemesh ad mavai v'chal haaretz hayir michoydam. He says, it's not my job to talk to you about luminaries whose lights lit up the entire Jewish world and their psakim shine from end to end. Gedolim b'chacham u'b'minyan v'shkulim keruba shel Sanhedrin. He says people who were tremendous b'chacham u'b'minyan and had the mile of Sanhedrin come out. He says karsim es devreim divrei lekem chayim kinesinasam misinai. He says these are some of the greatest. He says the Dayanim from Italy, who lived in the Tkufa when shaving became permissible. He says v'heima b'chayim chiyusam ro anshe dairim. They saw the people of their generations migulache zaken who were agishayin, didn't have a beard. b'misparayim, through using a scissors. Many of the Gedolim, the Rabbanim, this is the first we get of this, the Shemesh Tzedakah writes, many of the Gedolim HaPoskim in Italy during that Tkufa themselves didn't have beards. He says, even so, even though I know I'm nobody to stick up for these Gedolim, these people, I can't withhold my words. I have to say, I can't wrap my head around the people from there, and he's writing to the Yosef and you, who, with this kanayis for Asher that's burning inside of you, ligzar ala archim, you decided to be geyser on the guests. You decided to make a rule on the guests who arrive in your town that they can't, shave their beards. This is not really within your jurisdiction, B'chlal. He says, this is not a thing. You don't even have the right to make this rule. There's no remez by Raisa, this should be Asr, he says. You see, he's clearly going with the shittas that hold, that the Rambam doesn't hold Asr. He says there's no makam to be machmer, he says. And the whole world, meaning his whole world, the Italian world, is noig like the Mekilim. Mishanim kadmoinim, ba'yaris, b'kfarim, pnei gedolim, in cities, in villages, in front of great rabbis. V'halavai v'ulai talabi yadenu shmiras chaymas hatayra, hamasari lanim pi adenu neviim, b'chlalel pratea, shenamru b'sinai. Halavai says we should be able to keep the Torah as it was given from Moshe Rabbeinu, and let's just keep that. We don't need anything more than that. So you have the Shemesh Tzedakah who gives like a strong rebuke, and the Chidah who gives a strong rebuke and says, no, this is a minig that was established by Italian Poskim, who felt it was in Ganzen Mutter, as is the Stamius of the Gemara, as is the Stamius of the Rishonim, and therefore there's no reason to be machmer now and say, that anyone who shaves, who gets rid of their beard, is some sort of avari and can't participate. There's no makom for this. Now, this was a fight that consumed Italian Jews at that time during the 16 and 1700s. Ultimately, this is a fight that ends up consuming, there's many more fights along these lines and similar about shaving. Now, the real makim, the real breakthrough, that made shaving aser, that made trimming aser, in big swaths of Klal Yisrael, and I think I'll do this next week, but I'll just say what it is the Mekubalim. Now, what exactly the Kabbalah holds about shaving becomes a huge dispute, because possibly there were Mekubalim who shaved. Some of these Gedolim that the Shemesh Tzedakah is referring to might have been Mekubalim themselves. So we'll go into detail. The Chassam Sofer writes about a picture that he saw. Others say different pictures that they saw. Maybe we'll bring some photo evidence next week. But what the Mekubalim held about this and how that impacts the halacha is a whole separate shmuz that we'll get to. Okay, shkoyach.
Were not miser.
Yeah.
So that means people shaved before, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.